On today's show, a more mature Tom Wilson. Yeah, that's right. You heard me. Next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Caps Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about physicality being the theme of the first round of the playoffs between the Capitals and the Canadiens. And it's not so much the physicality that we see during the play, during the game. It's the extracurricular activities that the league really threw the book at the Capitals and the Habs. Why did the Caps and Habs get fined? I'll talk about that a bit later. Logan Thompson gets snubbed for the Vezina finalist. Listen, he was one of the front runners. It was Connor Hellebuyck and it was Logan Thompson for a lion's share of the season. What changed? But just to get it going here, talking about Tom Wilson to the rescue and a more mature Tom Wilson. Yes, despite the crybaby face, he is a very mature man. And you might be thinking, Dan, are you looking at this with Capitals colored glasses on? Maybe I am. But what I'm going to go ahead and say is that the physicality that boiled over in game number 3, when you saw Josh Anderson and Tom Wilson just going all at each other at the bench. It was right before the intermission there. And it was just out of control, and it should have never got to that point. And I think that everyone understood that. And, when they were talking to Spencer Carbery, he said that I have no issue with what kind of game Tom Wilson brings. We want to see that from him during the game. As long as they're clean hits, clean plays, we love it. It is the extracurricular activities. I'm talking about the fight on the bench, for example, or a lot of the action that we saw in game 1 behind the net after the whistle was blown, that the league looked in and they said, guys, this has got to stop. So what did Tom Wilson do? He turned it around and was absolutely huge for the Capitals in game number 4. Make no mistake about it. Had it not been for Tom Wilson and the big hit that he laid out, the Capitals would not have won the game. Now, we can argue if it was a clean hit, if it wasn't a clean hit. What I saw from the game is I thought it was a clean hit. But, covering this series, I've been paying attention to a lot of the Montreal press. And, of course, they believe that it was a dirty hit. And the referees are just not calling anything against the Capitals. And that's the way it is. When your team is not playing well and you're behind in the series, you want to throw it at the referees. And to be clear here, I've been guilty of it a time or two myself, but Tom Wilson, the more mature, despite the crybaby face, is showing what kind of player he is, and ultimately why everyone thinks that he is going to be the captain of the Capitals after Alex Ovechkin hangs up the skates. And it's moments like game number 4 when he laid out a perfectly placed hit that led to the Duhaime goal that put the Capitals into the win column is just what speaks volumes about what kind of player he is. And to a certain extent, some people might say, Dan, are you some kind of caveman? Are you some kind of advocate for violence? No, I'm not. But these players that signed up to play professional hockey that are getting paid millions of dollars That's what they signed up for, the possibility that you're going to get hit. And you know very well that a Capitals player in this series or the next series could get injured. Am I loving it? No. Was I loving it when Jack McBain took Alex Ovechkin out? No. Did I blame Jack McBain? No. So I think that the Canadiens need to take off their Canadiens hat-colored glasses and look at it for what it is. This is a Canadiens team that's not playing very well. They played pretty well, but it could all end for them on Wednesday night in game number 5. And I think that once you start reaching and you start going after, the refs, or you start going after Tom Wilson about a dirty hit, that's when things can go off the rails. But it was Tom Wilson to the rescue. In games 2 and 3 against Montreal, we remember Wilson's emotions boiled over, racking up 14 penalty minutes and spending over 20 minutes in the box once coincidental minors and misconducts were factored in. And it was one of the things that, Josh Anderson and Tom Wilson have quite a history together that goes way back and kind of cut from the same cloth. Both tough guys, even though Josh Anderson says that he hates being compared to Tom Wilson. It's quite a compliment, if you all things considered, if you see how many goals Tom Wilson, this goon so-called, puts up. That a big player. And I think that, Josh Anderson in games 1 in particular, we kind of cross-checked Tom Wilson, and Tom Wilson folded to the ice like a deck of cards that he got shoved around. And in game number 3, he said no more. He had enough. And that's what happened. It boiled over. But when I'm talking about a more mature Tom Wilson, is he learned something. Spencer Carbery said, "Look at me, Tom. Look at me." I don't know if this happened, but I got to imagine it happened somewhere. "We love your play out there, but that cannot continue. We love the physicality. We love all of that, but all of the physicality after the fact cannot go on." And Tom Wilson's like, message sent, message received, and he didn't do that. And the hit, like I'm talking about against Carrier in the game, again, we could argue if that was clean or if that was dirty, but it is something that spoke volumes about how he adjusted his play. And if he is going to put himself out physically, it's going to be in-game play and not in the extracurricular activities. His game 3 scrap with Josh Anderson, which spilled onto the Capitals bench, went viral. That moment was classic Tom Wilson, fiery, intense, and walking the fine line between controlled chaos and losing it entirely. And I think that part of the latter part was true there. I think that Tom Wilson lost it. It's if you keep poking someone, you keep poking the bear, well, eventually that bear is going to come after you. And, do I think that there's going to be a Josh Anderson, Tom Wilson dropping the mitts at mid-ice? I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, I guess the only way I see that happening is that if for some reason, the Capitals are losing in game number 5, or, say that the Canadiens are trying to, turn the momentum in their direction. But I don't think the Capitals need to do that. I mean, everything is going in their favor, and Tom Wilson doing Tom Wilson things is ultimately what put the Capitals in this position. But Wilson himself admitted after the game, speaking of his maturity, he said, quote, "I guess I should probably just shut up sometimes, but emotions get high," unquote. And that exemplifies exactly what I'm talking about, that he knows who he is. And, that when his emotions boil over, that it is like none other. It's humorous. I'm talking about the crybaby face. I'm talking about him putting his helmet on top of his head and mocking a player as well. I'm talking about him taking his jersey off and flexing on the camera. That, when he gets worked up and he gets really irritated, sometimes it is detrimental to the Capitals, but pound for pound, it is quite humorous. And we could argue about the crybaby face or those kind of things, and talking about him being mature. But I guess what I'm trying to say is Tom Wilson acknowledging where he made a mistake, and making a change is what is the definition for me for a maturity. And talking about making big changes, Coach Carbery emphasized before Game 4, the Capitals need Wilson on the ice, not in the box. And Tom Wilson knows that. As I heard him mentioning that in a podcast last summer with Mike Vogel, talking about that, I don't need to answer to the bell to every fourth line call-up that's trying to make a name for himself. I know how to score goals in the National Hockey League. And though I might want to make a name for myself and prove that I'm a tough guy, I realize that I'm better served out on the ice. So was the message sent and received for Wilson in Game 4, no penalties, over 21 minutes of ice time, the most among all Washington forwards. He delivered a massive clean hit, I'm going to say, on Alexandre Carrier that completely shifted the momentum. And then what happened? This is why I think he could be labeled the MVP of round number 1. Just 15 seconds later, Brandon Duhaime tied the game. The Capitals never looked back. If you are looking for defining moments in the series, that was it. In game number 4, a perfectly executed hit on Alexandre Carrier is what led to the Duhaime goal and what really caused the floodgates to open up for the Capitals. Wilson even refused a fight invitation from Anderson after the hit, a sign of growth and control that past versions of Wilson might not have shown. Equals maturity. And, I think to a certain extent, Tom Wilson was thinking to himself, I don't need to fight Josh Anderson. Why would that benefit me? I know who I am. I'm sound in what kind of person I am. I know I'm a tough guy. I also know I can score goals, and I know I need to be the bigger person here and walk away. My team is playing very well after a perfectly executed hit. Move on. Coach Carbery summed it up perfectly, quote, they just don't make them like Tom Wilson anymore, unquote. And touche, they don't. And, to all the people that say, Tom Wilson is a goon, he's a product of a bygone era, if those players that we're talking about don't put up big goals like Tom Wilson does. And after Game 4, it's crystal clear when Tom Wilson channels his energy the right way, the Caps are a nightmare to play against. So quite something that Tom Wilson has been able to put up, and, an about face from what we saw from him in his younger day, where he was constantly dropping the mitts with anyone that really wanted to. He laid out a perfect hit. He did not indulge in a fight with Josh Anderson, which speaks of his maturity and just understanding the lay of the land. That's what we love about Tom Wilson, and that is why he is the future captain of this team. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Logan Thompson snubbed as one of the Vezina finalists. What's behind that? I'll discuss straight ahead. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you've never been to a live NHL playoff game, it's unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it's next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Game Time is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save up to 60%. Save up to 60% off buying last minutes for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. Their all-in pricing show you the total cost up front. No surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this next segment here, talking Logan Thompson getting snubbed as one of the finalists for the Vezina. And a bit of an interesting thing here is that Darcy Kuemper, yes, that Darcy Kuemper, the one that everyone around the Capitals said, he sucks, get him out of here. Guess what? One of the finalists for the Vezina. Now, if we could be revisionists here, would we have a do-over? Would we have kept Darcy Kuemper here and Pierre-Luc Dubois out in LA? Not for a second. And at the end of the day, I wish Darcy Kuemper nothing but the best. And, it's just kind of interesting that it seems like Logan Thompson is getting snubbed everywhere he looks this season. Like there is this thing out in the ether here that just really doesn't like Logan Thompson. I guess what I'm talking about is the Four Nations snub. And now the Vezina snub. What is behind all of that? Let's take a deep dive in the second segment of today's show. The NHL announced the three finalists in the 2025 Vezina Trophy: Connor Hellebuyck, which, Darcy Kuemper, which that used to be Logan Thompson in there. Isn't that interesting that Darcy Kuemper and Logan, it's interesting. And Andrei Vasilevsky, a noticeable guy missing there, our guy, Logan Thompson. And what does he have to do to get noticed? We love Logan Thompson here. He is the guy that in a large part put the Capitals where they were at right now. Am I going to go ahead and say that the Capitals would not have made it to the playoffs had it been a Charlie Lindgren and a Hunter Shepard or Clay Stevenson tandem? Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that. Logan Thompson has been that big for this team this year, posting a 31-6-6 record, a 2.49 goals against, seventh among goalies with 25-plus games, and a 9-10 save percentage, ranked ninth. So what does this guy got to do to get some love? 26 goals saved above expected, third in the entire league, trailing only Hellebuyck and Vasilevsky. So I guess the salt in the wounds for me as a Capitals fan and Logan Thompson and maybe Brian McClellan, I guess, I don't know, is that the guy that kind of was entered into that whole mix was Darcy Kuemper, of the guy that they traded out of town just last summer. So interesting how that all worked. Now, this was after splitting starts for much of the season with Charlie Lindgren and still helping lead the Caps to the most points in the Eastern Conference. And, it's like I say, it's interesting about Logan Thompson, as I think that perhaps he burned some bridges in Vegas, that he's the word out there is that Vegas said that, it wasn't really the netminders, it's the defense making the netminders look good. And Logan Thompson called him out on that. And I think that they didn't like that. And I think that at least in part, that stink got around the room, and that is why he wasn't selected for the Four Nations. And maybe, I'm kind of taking a deep dive into the conspiratorial waters here. Maybe that is why he wasn't selected here as well. Now, the snub likely came down to appearances, is what they say. Now, Thompson played 43 games, while Hellebuyck and Vasilevsky both played 60. Is that really what it's all about? You think at the end of the day, I think that is a good front to put on it. Kuemper logged 50 for a tight Kings team. And to be clear here, Darcy Kuemper is a great netminder. And, if you want to take a look back on some of the old episodes, I give you my thoughts on Darcy Kuemper. I'll give you an abbreviated version. He came to the Capitals when Spencer Carbery first was here, and they were rolling out his systems. They weren't fully integrated. And by the time that the team was fully integrated with the new systems, Charlie Lindgren was already the guy, and Darcy Kuemper really never got another opportunity. So it was the perception that he wasn't a good fit with the Capitals. The Capitals were looking for a really good first or second line center, and they were able to take a look into that and thought that Pierre-Luc Dubois was that guy. In any event, that is what happened. Darcy Kemper, the guy that is second in all that mix, is now for the Vezina finalists, and Logan Thompson snubbed again. To be clear here, I'm very happy that Logan Thompson is here. I just think that at the end of the day, why the snub? If you want to point to the games thing, maybe. I guess that's not true. Or maybe it's true. I guess I don't know. But it's a tough break for Logan Thompson, who has been absolutely amazing for the Capitals for a lion's share of the season. Now, still given Thompson's efficiency and the Capitals' record with him in net, his omission is frustrating. It feels like a clear case of if you know, you know, and around DC, we know exactly how valuable Logan Thompson has been this year. A key piece for the Capitals. And at the end of the day, Logan Thompson takes it in stride. He is a guy that doesn't seem to let things bother him too much. When the Capitals won in the playoffs, he said, at least we got the 2 points. And Strom looks at him and goes, no points in the playoffs. He's like, oh, yeah. So he doesn't seem like a guy that takes things too seriously. But at the end of the day, was pulling for Logan Thompson. I at least hope that he would be listed as one of the finalists. As it turns out, not the case. I guess Logan Thompson can rest back on his performance in the playoffs and maybe taking this team to the cup. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the Caps and the Habs getting fined. Now, out there, it was said that, the physicality is fine. It's fine. It just can't go over the top. It can't spill into the benches. Why were the Caps and Habs fined? I'll discuss straight ahead. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Now, listen, the Wizards, they're not in the playoffs, but say you want vested interest in all of the playoff games. Open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, the game's got that much more exciting. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So word was today that the Capitals and the Habs got fined. The two organizations got fined, and Dylan McIlrath and Arber Xhekaj, they got fined as well. And you might be thinking to yourself, Dylan McIlrath hasn't even played in this series. How is it possible? It does appear that before the game started in the pregame skate there, Arber Xhekaj and Dylan McIlrath were having a word with each other. And it's interesting. You think to yourself, Dylan, you're not in the mix. You're not playing tonight. Why you got to do that? I guess when you're two tough guys, you really kind of want to just lock horns and talk about how tough you are. But at the end of the day, both players got fined and both organizations got fined as well. So let's dive into that in the final segment of the show. The NHL handed out supplemental discipline after a minor confrontation during warmups before Game 4. And this was to send a message to both organizations and to the players that we told you we're not going to tolerate it, and you did something we said you shouldn't do, and guess what? I got to slap your hands. Dylan McIlrath and Arber Xhekaj were fined the maximum allowable amounts under the CBA for, quote, unsportsmanlike conduct, unquote. Each team, the Capitals and Canadiens, also got hit with $25,000 in fines. Now, here's what happened. If you want me to get more into a granular level here, Xhekaj, who's been pestering Caps players all series, skated dangerously close to center ice red line. McIlrath, ever the enforcer, wasn't about to let that slide and stood his ground. And, Arber Xhekaj, he is a guy, he's kind of almost entering into goon territory, if you will. And I know I'll probably get some grief from Habs fans on that. But, that's what he's kind of turning himself into. He's kind of pigeonholed himself into just a tough guy. And I think that if he is going to have a long, flourishing career in the NHL, that he has to have a bit of that, but I think he could add a bit more skill than just that growl to his game. But at the end of the day, I don't blame Dylan. I think that, if you're going to talk smack to him, you better pack a lunch because the Big Mac don't play. Some words were exchanged, nothing major, but enough to catch the league's attention. So do you think they learned? That's the big thing. We also heard about Wilson, and we heard about Josh Anderson getting fined. I think it was like $5,000 if memory serves. Again, this is all just slaps on the wrist for multimillionaires. But at the end of the day, both organizations getting fined and players getting involved, I think that's going to start sending the message. Now, interestingly, McIlrath, of course, it is interesting. He wasn't even in the game, like I said. Xhekaj dressed and continued to stir the pot. That's his game as a chirper. And I understand that it is a bit of a fine art. I get all that, even needing to be held back by an official during intermission. And one of the things is that, when he was laying out big hits, I'm not familiar, other than Martin St. Louis, I'm not too familiar with the coaching staff, but one of the coaches was tapping him on the, kind of tapping him on the shoulders and talking to him with a smile on his face, like, keep doing what you're doing out there. Keep doing what you're doing. That they are trying to keep, Arber Xhekaj almost like a junkyard dog, just like, yeah, that a boy, just go out there and keep getting them. It is an interesting position for Xhekaj that, like I say, it seems like he's almost getting kind of pigeonholed into just a tough guy. Now, this follows Saturday's fines for Wilson and Anderson, which I talked about in Game 3. It's clear the Capitals and Canadiens series has what I'm going to say kind of like that old school bad blood energy to it, and the NHL is trying to keep a lid on it at least a little. One of the things that we know about the playoffs is they don't call it as closely as they do during the regular season because this is prime time. This is like pay-per-view. This is paying the NHL's bills and the broadcasters' bills that they want as many eyes on the sport right now as possible. And it's working because I hear more and more people talking about, did you watch the Caps game, or did you watch the Wild game, or the Kings, or the Jets? That people that were, maybe somewhat mediocre hockey fans are just totally into it. So there is something to it. And make no mistake about it, despite the fact that the Josh Anderson and Tom Wilson fight on the bench was something that we had not seen in a long time. Let's just say a long time. There was a buzz about it. People that weren't hockey fans were talking about it. And when you look at hockey as, one of the big professional sports out there, it needs all the help that it can get because it is still last amongst the major sports in viewership and attendance. That if we can cast, a bright light onto the sport, even if it's for moments like fighting or Alex Ovechkin, catching and passing Gretzky, it's all for the greater good. I understand that the league has, a responsibility to not let it, morph into like a wrestling match. I get all that. But at the end of the day, it's entertainment. I'm entertained. The people watching the games are entertained. And, you got to think Tom Wilson and Josh Anderson, at the end of the day, two guys locking horns. They like it as well. It's just the league saying, hey, you got to kind of tamper that down a little bit. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.